Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Cyber Security in the Midst of Uncertainty. And I'm your host, Wendy Maguire. I'm an account manager here at Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. And I noticed from the registrations that we have quite a few non-members joining us today. So you're very, very welcome. And my details will come up at the end of the presentations this afternoon, if you'd like to contact me to talk about the Chamber, to talk about membership. But simply we provide business support for small, medium and large businesses in the UK through the British Chambers of Commerce, and we look after the Thames Valley region. So our speakers today are Brett Misselbrook of A&O Cyber Security and Bharath Vasudevan, Vice President of Alert Logic. If we can save any questions until the end of the presentations, please, and we'll take them then. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Brett.
Wonderful. Thank you. I hope everybody can see me, and welcome everybody. I appreciate your time, and Wendy, thank you for the introduction. I am, in fact, Brett Misselbrook, of course, from the A&O IT group. Perhaps by way of brief introduction, we are a managed services provider that deliver high quality, cost-effective, fully managed IT solutions to our customers here on home soil and globally as well. So for today's purposes, which I'll talk you through shortly, we really are focusing on the cybersecurity portion of our business, which is fortunately a very well-established element of our business, having well over 20 years worth of experience here locally. And really the situation is that we deliver a very broad range of services to our customers at a local and at a global level as well. You'll appreciate, as you'll see on screen, we have a deep reach into a number of countries. We offer a wide range of services to our customers. And in essence, really, it's to help customers understand where vulnerabilities might exist in their systems, with their procedures and with their people, and then to guide our customers through how best to rectify those and ensure that they are as resilient as they could be in the world of cyber at this point in time. So to break the ice this afternoon, if you could indulge me for a few minutes, I thought I might, certainly before I hand over to my colleague Bharath, I thought I might just talk you through a hypothetical week in my real lifestyle, which essentially involves me getting involved in a club. So it's essentially no ordinary club, and it's no club that I really wanted to be participating in. And it's certainly one of the clubs in the world that is extremely fast growing. So the backstory is I'm a relatively busy businessman. I enjoy the work that I do. I obviously work with companies at home and I work with companies abroad, and I'm constantly communicating with them. And I'm a busy family man, married with 3 children as well. So as you can imagine, I've got a fairly busy diary. So I've had a very, very interesting week this week. As you can appreciate, with a diary like mine, I've spent an immense amount of time online on video calls. Some of those video calls, of course, are in discussions with clients of ours and sensitive issues around breach attempts on their networks and perhaps our involvement in curtailing them. And it moves on to my personal investments. What do I do with my portfolio to get my best returns? And it is fantastic that I have the confidence that I can do this in the utmost confidence. So obviously, as I moved on with my week, football, they said, the chaps that I was on conference with, they said, it's a fantastic short-term opportunity for investment purposes. Well, I thought, well, that's wonderful. I'm brave. So I put some money in and I invested in a club that we knew were destined to be top of the league that season. You know, what could go wrong? How was I to know that in 10 days, that 3 of their key players would be embroiled in a doping scandal through some leaked documents, and would essentially result in a 55% drop in their share price. In any event, being chuffed with my investment in my football initiative, I forged ahead on the week's work, having a tight business schedule of about 6 cities to get to in about 3 days, and a barrage of meetings in between. So for some reason at the airport when I arrived, there was an extremely long check-in at the airport check-in counter, which I believe was due to some form of a technical problem, I think they called it. In any event, it was all good. The rest of the week was fairly interesting, to say the least. I didn't mind arriving a little bit late in my first customer's premises based in Germany, in Berlin. He certainly didn't mind what time I arrived. And I didn't mind waiting another hour and a half in a bank in Amsterdam late one evening trying to draw some cash because my credit card wasn't working for some or other reason. So as the week moved on and I gathered myself together and I arrived in my third city, nearly a day late, with a little bit of cash left in hand, I was consoled by the fact that, you know, I was able to work in a quiet and focused and professional environment as we travel internationally. And in my line of work, just so that you're aware, I often am involved in what we call red teaming exercises. Perhaps you have or haven't heard the term, but essentially part of the exercise is intelligence gathering on our customers, on their people, on their physical sites, and on their processes. And obviously this is conducted covertly for obvious reasons. So being where I am, I'm very, very fortunate that nobody knows where I am or how long I'll be there. So it was a busy week, to say the least. I got back home, was happy to get back to the family, you know, see the children just before a weekend away, and they began school again. And thought, let me go for a run. Great way to de-stress. It seems to be my poison. You know, I'm fairly good at my running. I'm consistent. I run a similar scenario every week, the same route, in essence. My wife thinks I'm a better runner than what I am. That's probably a different story for a different day. Wouldn't it be slightly embarrassing if the chaps at the office knew that I was out for a run last week Wednesday when I should have been in on that EXCO meeting? What's probably more embarrassing is if they knew my 5-mile time. In any event, got home, hanging the shoes up, the kids came rushing downstairs, hugely excited because of the weekend away we'd planned. And that excitement lasted over the evening and into the trip to the airport the next morning, where again, we hit some rather significant snags on checking into the check-in counter where they couldn't find our tickets. I was beginning to think my luck was running really far out that week. In any event, we managed to eventually get on the plane and headed our way out. I had been fortunate enough, and the bank had given me a new credit card that week, which I was clutching in my hand. And of course, when we disembarked on the island, interesting to get an SMS from them saying that I had just purchased about £5,000 worth of fuel in North Africa. I thought, goodness, this is rather interesting. I must look at that when I get back to the office. So the weekend was absolutely fantastic. We got back. We had an immense amount of material to share on social media, as you can appreciate. But like most people, I'm very, very cautious as to what we share. So I don't give away too much location and quite specifically share only what we want. Oh, I did forget to mention, actually, when we were away, I managed to pick up a top-of-the-range mobile phone as well. It's got phenomenal photo qualities. In fact, so much so that those back-to-school photographs I took of the children, you can zoom right on into their blazer chests and read every word of the schools that they're at. Pretty phenomenal, isn't it? In any event, at the end of the week, as I shut down and the dust had settled and I was preparing for another week's onslaught, I sat back and thought, well, you know, I've got so much access to so much information here at home. I can upload everything through broadband, and just realized how much safer and more controlled life is now than when I was a child. Well, I think, was I having a bad week? Or, if we get back to reality, maybe there was somewhat sinister motives at play. So the reality, folks, is, you know, there is a lot of activity. We know illicit activity that's taking place, and hence the session today. We may make light of the process in a hypothetical scenario, but the reality is that this is taking place constantly. So today, really, it was just to highlight some of those key areas with you. What I did want to cover is just a new angle on things. You know, typically with these presentations, there are far too many statistics that are shared. There are a lot of statistics available in terms of the state of cyber at a global level and how it might pertain to your business, you know, whether you're looking at IDC or you're looking at Forrester. Poneman is a really good resource, and I know that our friends at Logic work closely with as well, where we can pick up on this information and we can look at the breaches. But in essence, I wanted to just run through some of those that we see on a more frequent basis. Some you may have heard of, and some perhaps you may not have heard of it at all. So if we look at a profile of some of the activities that we're constantly fighting against, protecting our clients against, we often see activities along the lines of drive-by type attacks, which, to give you a view, is really when an unsuspecting person clicks on a website and unsuspectingly downloads some untoward code that now resides on their local machine and gives access to that. There are denial of service attacks that take place that you'll see as well. It's almost the grandfather of some of the attacks that are taking place, where typically that has a single objective, and that's purely to disrupt a particular environment by placing a lot of network traffic in that environment and rendering processing impossible. Of course, phishing is another one as well. that we see all too frequently. And again, we see a lot of that in the media. We know there's a lot of training around that as well, in terms of what is phishing, knowing all too well it's purely, in simple terms, a fraudulent attempt at gaining legitimate information. And there's a number of ways that people go about that. So we do see a lot of that activity and a lot of increase of that activity over this period as well. We also see what's termed SQL injections. It seems a little bit technical, but in all honesty, all it is again, code that's been written by the hacker fraternity that intends to get into databases where data sits and share the information within that database. Something that may seem fairly obvious, but something that, surprisingly enough, is not attended to in many, many instances by database administrators and those that are in the business of protecting that data. Obviously, there are other elements as well that have come into play and become more popular in the last couple of years, one of which is insider threats. Typically, it is, as one would see as it is employees or contractors or somebody that has access to your internal systems, where obviously they can facilitate the sharing of information. And unfortunately, this is becoming a trend that's all too evident lately. And I think just to summarize, this slide in whole, it all talks to malware and ransomware, which is one of those key elements, sadly, and that really is a very large basket of goods and applications that have been written by the hacker fraternity out there with a very singular objective, and that is to obtain access to data or to lock data down for poor purposes, naturally, as well. So if we look at all of these attack vectors or attack angles or attack styles that come in, we also like to try and understand why these take place. So the motivating factors we have through some of the public material that comes in and through some of the contacts we have within the industry, we start understanding that there are certain motives that drive people to conduct these activities. So one is the emotional side, as we would term it, and really what that is it talks to the idealists that are out there. We need to recognize the fact that the gentlemen that are involved and ladies that are involved in the hacking fraternity are typically non-conformist individuals. You may look at the imagery on the slide there, and it talks to that point that they are, every thread of their DNA questions process and they question procedure. And they're definitely not into coloring within the lines at all. They will look for any opportunity to step outside of that. So if you take that mentality and you mix that with questionable ethics, it can be a dangerous combination. And we see also that with the gang initiation mentality as well, where typically young hackers might be given tasks to do. On successfully achieving those tasks, they obviously get granted deeper rights into the larger hacking pools as well. That married with, which I've just touched on just now, revenge attacks seems to definitely be on the rise as well. So typically that would take the form of a disgruntled employee or a contractor that may have access to internal systems and of course can certainly affect the environment on a much easier basis. The second point that I want to cover quickly here as well is the commercial component. So intellectual property carries an enormous amount of value. We all appreciate that. And obviously there's a lot of financial gain if the perpetrators are able to get in and pull any of that IP, and they have a number of tactics that they employ to get into that space. It's undeniably one of those elements of cybersecurity that we do see in the news frequently. And certainly from our perspective and any of the solution providers' perspectives, it's an area of business where an immense amount of effort is placed into protecting the environment on an ongoing basis. So thirdly, in terms of motivating factors that we see come through, is one that shouldn't be ignored, and we know one that again has come to the fore over the last couple of years, and is probably the most serious of the lot because of its ability to destabilize certain environments. So typically, from a socio-political perspective, we would see, again, ideological issues being carried out and attacks taking place at a very high level. Typically, these are done by state-backed entities where they might want to suppress government critics and oppositions and so on. And they are backed by nation states, which means they're very well funded, they're well planned, and they are understandably executed by very tech-savvy professionals as well. The good news here is many international governments, and certainly here on UK soil, are investing a significant amount of funding into supporting the defences and the development against typically these types of activities. We know that early this year, £100 million was made available for exactly those purposes. I think £10 million in February was announced for startup companies over a period of a number of years, that they could tap into those funds to help propagate and develop the right level of best practice in terms of their development of their cyber environments. And I know another 36 or 37 million pounds was announced at the end of last year to the hardware developers, I think in the shape of ARM, on the microchip, so that we could tackle this problem right from the front. So, given the fact that all of these activities are taking place, we have to be cognizant of the fact that there is a community out there. We cannot deny it's a vibrant community. It's a community that sits below what we would see on a daily basis as the surface web, in essence. And that community obviously have got a number of functions that they need in order to survive and to propagate their businesses. There are email services that operate out there. So whether you're using a Proton Mail or SecMail or MailPile or any one of these, they offer very specific types of connectivity to the people utilizing the dark web. In some instances, they host their own environment, their own infrastructure, and now are positioned in politically neutral countries, such as Switzerland, where there's a degree of immunity against the data management portion of things. Obviously, in that environment, you've got search engines that are running, whether it's Candle or Not Evil or Cerex, and there are a number of those as well. The thinking behind it, naturally, is that there is a very large degree of anonymity, and there's very little genealogy in the ability to track the usage of users against those various search engines. So complementing that as well, and what we see on a frequent basis, is that file sharing is a natural requirement, typically in these environments. And again, where you and I might be using a OneDrive or an iCloud or a Google Drive on a day-to-day basis in sharing what we share, so too there is a parallel world of file sharing that takes place and is accessible. Just a point to note here as well, it's not all used necessarily for purely illicit means. I think a good example of the use of this for above ground activities would be the likes of the large media houses at a global level. If we think of the Forbes or Financial Times or Reuters, all run independent dark web boxes for themselves, essentially for a whistleblower type of activity. So typically where we see global information coming out of political hotspots, we might see it coming through the dark web environment in order for it to break through for general public consumption. So I think to just complete the platform and the environment area of, naturally, one of the largest pivotal areas is the cryptocurrency and digital wallets. Obviously, there's an immense amount of digital trade that takes place on the back end. And as you can well appreciate from a cryptocurrency perspective, again, very difficult to trace straight line transactions in this world. So what does that lead to? Sadly, and the reality is it leads to a lot of activity that is burgeoning underground. This activity is real. What I've placed on the slide before you is referenceable material that we get through. There are public domain reports that come through. There is information that we can glean through our channels as well in terms of the reality of what the value is for some of those transactions. So obviously, without touching on each of those transactions out there, whether you would be in the dark web shopping for simple credit card data, whether you'd be looking to get involved in intercepting some form of payment gateway services, as you can well imagine, there's an immense value that takes place to that. And for a young hacker that's that environment, it certainly seems like an easy way to make money from not being traced perspective, let's put it that way. I think a quick and an interesting example on the social media portion on the left-hand side of your slide would be the breach of and the hack of a number of Twitter accounts a couple of months ago. About 130 accounts or so, I think, were breached. Very high-profile people. I think Mark Zuckerberg's account was breached, George Bezos from Amazon as well. And in fact, the hackers at that point had tweeted a hack out against George Bezos' account that stated for every single Bitcoin that somebody sold in, he would pay them back too. Now, as illogical as that may sound to you or I, the news tells us that after a mere day, there were 383 transactions, I think to the value of just nearly $120,000 in there. So the reality is it's a business activity, and it's activity that's not going away, and it's very, very real as we can see it. Obviously, and I think just to close the concept of the fact there's so much going on, if you take these concepts down a level to a more sinister level, this is where it starts to get more disruptive in a direct business space. You can see that you can literally shop for various forms of malware at different quality, different volumes. where you obviously would have, or the people perpetrating would have very planned activities, very specific targets, looking for very specific outcomes. Again, from a DDoS attack, there's more examples there of where you might see one very anti-competitive behavior play out between online retailers that may want to disrupt each other's platforms, and sadly we do see that. So if I turn quickly, just to complete my portion of this, to the breach itself, obviously these breaches are happening. Obviously, there are many breaches that are denied through a lot of the work that we do, and Bharath will be touching on that now as well. But the reality is there is lost data in this process, and I think one of the issues that's not probably told clearly to many people is once your data is lost, your data is in fact lost. So there are a number of providers that provide insurances against data loss. And I think there are certain values that you can attach to your data if you look inwardly as a business. Obviously, each business is different. Your priorities will be different. I know for clients of ours, perhaps in the legal fraternity, reputation and integrity may take absolute front and center stage for them and be more important than any other elements in terms of what the knock-on effects might be of a breach. Regardless of circumstance, there will be and there are costs associated with repairing what damage may have done. We call in on specific skilled people on short notice, typically to get the environments back up to speed. And of course, that's got an inherent knock-on effect. We also know that downtime has got a pound or a dollar value associated with it. Most of us can calculate that in our business environments. In particular, we know, again, our customers that are involved in supply chain activities or factory and production activities, this has got a significant impact as well. So something that they are acutely aware of as they move forward in their defenses. And naturally, of course, there are knock-on consequences of compliancy breach as well. We know with the heavily regulated environments, such as the banking environment, of course, globally, and anybody that may be dealing into government space, certainly would need to be looking very, very closely at what those consequences might be in terms of just balancing affairs when they look at the impact of the breach. So is it the perfect storm? Well, it possibly is. It's not. The reality is, it's not all doom and gloom. We may have a level of intellect out there that's fighting against business on a day-to-day basis. There are sets of tools that are being used on an ongoing basis that are they're very fluid, they're evolutionary, they move forward, and they're certainly not static in any way. And so do the platforms as well. But the good news, the absolute good news, the silver lining is there is an immense amount of work being done by ourselves and by our partners, developing new platforms and new tools, new ways of monitoring, and new ways of delivering those services to ensure that certainly from a client support perspective and a user support perspective, we're getting the best practice out of what we can in the industry. So this is an opportune moment for me to hand over to Bharath, who I'm quite certain should be pretty good at, pretty well-versed in sharing with us his knowledge around alert logic and certainly the managed detection and response portion of our session today. So Bharath, let me hand over to you quickly as well.
Thank you so much, Brett. Ooh. Can we move this forward?
There we go. Oh. Have you got it? Yeah.
I think you're going to have to keep moving it for me. I don't know how to do it myself.
Okay, I think, Wendy, have you got control there? Good.
Yeah, John has control.
Good.
Okay.
All right. So let's move ahead, Brett. So you want to bump more ahead? When we talk about the challenge today, right? You spent a fair amount of time explaining how the bad guys are organized, and that definitely tells one side of the picture. But the other side is what all of you guys are doing in your IT lives today. Do you advance one? So, if in this time especially, I've seen these fun memes that COVID has been the biggest driver of digital transformation. We've run into these problems where all of these brick and mortar companies have now had to all of a sudden get web storefronts just to ensure survival. the move to the cloud. I mean, nobody is exploring the cloud for the first time, or very few people are, but they're moving into their second or third year in the cloud. In some cases, that could mean on-prem Office to O365. That could mean moving from the E3 license to the E5 license and adopting a lot of Microsoft information protection, because it's been a few years since that's happened. It can be getting into OneDrive, moving to a cloud-first model. All of these things are happening that are increasing your attack surface. They're increasing the areas where, primarily, if you had a really strong perimeter security, yeah, you could say, you know, I've protected everything. Everybody came into the office. It was very easy, but that's not our reality, especially today. So there is a lot of things happening in IT where IT is driving innovation, driving agility, driving speed, that a lot of times security doesn't get to have that conversation, doesn't get invited to that conversation until there's something wrong. I've had conversations with large, you know, multinationals where their IT teams and their security teams never really spoke. And when they ended up getting engaged was when there was actually a problem. So that's one element of it. Now, if you move forward, the next operational challenge that we all have right now is that you can't hire and keep people. It's another big problem. I've lost employees because my competitor offered pet insurance. That was the reason that somebody left. It had nothing to do with quality of the job. It had nothing to do with the trajectory of the company. It was something that small and insignificant. And it's impossible because everybody will have their pet insurance for why they're looking at something else. So staffing is a challenge. The next thing we've got is the next thing we've got is really the tool complexity. Before SaaS was a thing, there was no security discipline called CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker. Before everybody moved their workloads to the public cloud, AWS or Azure, there was no such thing as a shared security responsibility model. You know, before people were connecting direct to cloud, there was no such thing as SD-WAN. So all of these technologies are coming out and you're having to keep track of it. And the last piece of this here is really what Brett spent a fair amount of time talking about, the impact of breaches. But he talked about techniques, he talked about the bad actors. Let's look at this from a slightly different angle. Go ahead. And you can go ahead and build out this. So there's pre-breach, there's the attack and breach, and then there's post-breach. Across the bottom is really what the bad guys are up to. And if you want to continue building this out, that will, there we go. So whether you know it or not, the bad guys are always looking. They're sending pings to web servers. They're trying to see what it responds back as. And there's a lot of best practices that you could implement that say, hey, don't tell them what you are when they ping you. But if something goes back and it says, I'm running IIS 7 from 12 years ago, then they know all of the vulnerabilities that exist, that are exploitable for those servers. But really, there's people always looking. And then what we found is most attacks, they succeed in minutes, and 2/3 of them go undiscovered for months. Now, the reality is nobody's environment is static. Nobody. Everyone's environment is always changing. So what are you trying to do here? There's two pieces that you as a practitioner need to be concerned with. One, minimizing the probability of a successful attack. And the second is, look, I know prevention is not going to be 100% effective. So then how do you minimize the impact of a successful attack? So, you know, if you think your privacy is safe, I don't think my privacy is safe. I just want to know the second it's been breached so I can do something about it before somebody can use it, before I get an alert from my credit card company saying, hey, did you approve this thing in Kuala Lumpur? and I did not. So I want to know before that. So finding things faster before they cause any damage should really be what you want to get done. Now, here's the big problem, and this is really what Brett was alluding to, if you want to move ahead. For a while, cybersecurity investments were ahead of cybercrime losses. You know, it was working. But if you look at what's happened over the last few years, the slope of the losses has changed. And this is when it went from underground hackers in hoodies to large corporations, large illicit corporations that were all trying to get you. Now, what I want to share with you is, one, you're definitely not alone. And if you move ahead, you'll see that there are a lot of challenges. And these are things that you guys are dealing with. Do you have to be compliant? Needless to say, GDPR has been an interesting ride over the last couple of years. And now you're starting to see some of the fines. You're starting to see some of the enforcement coming. And by and large, it is happening to the big guys, but that's how it always starts. I alluded to it earlier as part of digital transformation. How is the acceleration happening in the cloud? What are you guys doing at 3 in the morning when some bad activity happens? We actually maintain a SOC in Houston, Texas, and another one in Cardiff in Wales. And we cover around the clock. What we've determined is 2/3 of malicious activity happens after business hours, happens on nights and weekends, on holidays. And ultimately, you guys need to understand risk. Now, if you were to do 24/7 threat monitoring yourself, it can be pretty expensive. And if you advance 4, if you need a minimum of 5 people and then 3 shifts, then once you get those people, well, you have to pay them, and they're not terribly inexpensive, which you all probably do know that as well. Moving ahead. Now, again, once you keep them, now you have to keep them happy. So this is their CISSP certifications, their SANS certifications, their AWS certifications. Oh, now we're moving to Azure. I need those certifications too. So this keeps getting, and by the way, these things are just people expenses. Now, if you go to the last one, now you're talking about your tooling. And that's, I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. Now, here's the crazy part. If you don't spend that $1.5 million to $4 million, if you spend, let's say I'm going to spend £1 million, I don't get 70% effectivity. This is very much like a pole vault. If you don't clear that bar, you get no points. So it's a very daunting challenge for many organizations. So now there's 2 ways of addressing all of these challenges. And if you want to move ahead, one is to build it yourself. You know, you go assemble your tools from that crazy tool chain that we showed earlier. You have to integrate them. You have to figure it out. And you have to get all those people that we talked about, that crazy investment in and not just preventative technologies, but then the detection pieces. Or you can let somebody else do it. Now, typically these have had high costs. Yeah, you're basically saying, I've created this mess, but I want you to manage it for me. You may not get their best effort. You may get their B team. And again, they're still having to replicate what you're trying to do. It's not a different model. It's just not your accountability. Now, what we were talking about here is managed detection and response. And if you move ahead one, see, now we're talking about delivering that 24/7 threat monitoring, detection, and some response services. And this isn't my definition, this is Gartner's definition. So how is this a little bit different? We're not managing a firewall. We're helping you identify things that are in your environment, and we're giving you guidance on how to improve the hygiene of your environment. A lot of times, you know, your staff gets overwhelmed with alerts. Well, now we've got security researchers laying out all the telemetry pieces. They're capturing the data, they're sorting through it, and they're separating the signal from all of that noise, and they're sending it to you and giving you guidance on what to do next. Now, this guidance could be patching. This guidance could be changing your passwords. There's lots of different pieces. And if you move ahead one more, if I look at all these IT use cases that managed security providers can help you with, managing a firewall, managing your AV, doing pen testing, these are all things that are, for the most part, IT centric. And they are absolutely things that can help you. And if these are things you need help with, I encourage you to go look at an MSS to help you do some of these things. You know, Brett was even talking about some of the pen testing services that are available. These are great options. But for us, for Alert Logic, they're not really core to what we do. If you move to the next slide, now you look at some of these other pieces. This is really what we do as part of managed detection and response. We're monitoring changes, we're monitoring logs, we're ingesting pieces, we're researching threats, investigating alerts, helping you with response, scanning for the vulnerabilities in your systems. This is effectively what we're trying to do for you. And if you move forward, the reason we're trying to do it, and forward again, is that this is really what we're trying to solve for from an MDR perspective. This is what we're trying to address with managed detection and response. We want to give you that visibility that you don't have. Ultimately, we want to reduce the likelihood or impact of an attack. You reduce the likelihood by cleaning up, doing all the hygiene pieces up front that are going to make you look less vulnerable. Now, that can be keeping up with patching. That can be identifying that your Amazon S3 buckets are unprotected, your encryption is not implemented properly, or it could be, hey, I'm seeing lateral movement in your environment, and I'm seeing connections back to known bad systems, some of the same ones that Brett was talking about earlier. We see that, we identify that, hey, it looks like you've been breached, but the bad guy is still working through your environment trying to find that sensitive data to take out. You probably need to stop that now. So we can't, we want to stop you from getting breached, but sometimes it's not possible. But I want to find it before there's damage. All the things that are happening in your environment that looks like bad activity, we'll identify it and we'll inform you. You'll know. We leverage things like machine learning. So instead of relying on what an analyst can see, we're going to rely on what a computer can see. Instead of what a person can correlate, we're seeing what a computer can correlate. And we're going to put all those pieces back together and only tell you what's important. That's really the beauty of what we're trying to achieve. Now, John, if you don't mind skipping ahead 3 slides, I want to talk to you about how we do that. So one of the things that we talk about is, we want to protect you everywhere you operate. Whether you're in AWS, whether you moved to a DevOps environment many years ago, and now you moved from Docker and Kubernetes to EKS and ECS, all in AWS. And I know that's a ton of acronyms. And if you understood all of that, then you're definitely DevOps forward. If you didn't understand all of that, you know about AWS and you know about Azure and you know about Google Cloud. We never stopped working on-prem. We've got Forrester, one of the largest analyst communities in the world, basically came out and said, if cloud's your game, Alert Logic is your answer. 8 years ago, it made sense that they were ahead, but it's 2020 and we're still ahead. So we got to protect you wherever you are. Then once we do that, we've got our teams of PhDs figuring out where the bad guys are, how they're moving. We're looking at 30 petabytes of data, and this is parsed, analyzed. The crazy part here, and I talked about the ML that we do before, but because we have over 4,000 customers globally, a large chunk of which are in the UK, we get to see what's happening in all of our customers' environments. We get to then identify who's exposed, why they were exposed, and many times we proactively let our customers know who haven't been breached about other environments that have been exploited that exist in their environment. So listen, there is an active emerging threat going on. You have the same environment that's being exploited. It would behoove you to take care of this thing now before something bad happens. And we do all of that by leveraging these SOCs that I told you about, the one in the UK and the one in the US. And we're solving for that cybersecurity skills shortage problem by creating a proprietary training program where we can take people off the street who have an interest in cyber, train them up, give them a career and growth path within our SOC, and we end up keeping them 2x to 3x longer than the industry standard. So this is a little bit of how we do that. And I want to dig into this just a little bit deeper. So if you move one ahead, the idea here is coverage, right? How can I protect you if I only work on-prem? How can I protect you if I only operate in the cloud? Very, very few customers now, outside of the ones that were born yesterday that are all in the cloud and would never consider investing in physical infrastructure, but now they're in AWS and they're in Azure. Most of these cloud providers really only take care of their own. So this is part of your challenge. Now, whether it's Okta, whether it's single sign-on, whether it's O365, whether it's AWS, Control Tower, GuardDuty, all of these other pieces, we're taking in all of that information and we're extracting the security value out of it. You move one ahead. Now, this platform, this isn't something that, you know, we have some of our competitors, some that you guys get to deal with too, that have IBM QRadar as their background, as their infrastructure. We have some competitors in the States that marry Trend Deep Security with HP's ArcSight, or gosh, I think it might be Micro Focus's ArcSight now. But they're marrying those technologies together, two tools that don't talk to each other. And they're trying to say, hey, we can deliver you the same goodness from someone who's built the platform themselves, operates it, has the PhDs writing all the behavioral analytics rules, with a console that allows you to have up-to-the-minute dashboards or scheduled reporting, and a SOC that's going to pick up the phone and communicate, well, pick up the phone for very bad issues, but communicate with me the way I want to be communicated. And lastly, we've got all these people that are sorting through false positives, the people that are leveraging the tools that we're doing for collection, that we're doing for analyzing. I mean, this is hand in glove and whatever goes on top of your glove to keep you even warmer. These were all things that were designed together to operate in a manner in which you are the winner. Now, we've taken this thing and we've put it into 3 packages. Next, please. You know, and go ahead and build this out. One more? Yeah. So Alert Logic Professional is really the main, our core offering. And if you do one more click, please. There's underpinning benefits that sit across all of these things, but the idea behind having 3 packages is really about flexibility. Not all of your assets are as risky as the next. So for your riskiest assets, we've got MDR Professional. Critical high-risk assets, we're doing the whole suite of things, threat detection, incident management. We give you a 15-minute SLA. When something's wrong and we find it and it's bad, you know within 15 minutes. So you can start taking the action to remediate. You get a person who is your MDR concierge who will help you through all of these processes. They're your single point of contact back at, and not your account team. So they're not sales compensated. They're basically just a resource for you. That's professional. Now, we know not every asset in your environment is of equal risk. So that's why we have Essentials. It's doing your vulnerability scanning. Just because it doesn't hold the critical data, we know how the bad guys work. They get in and they start moving around. So you don't want to give them the ability to get in. So Essentials gives you asset discovery, vulnerability scanning, cloud configuration checks, things like that. Now, for our more security sophisticated customers, they need specialized tuning. They need a lot of bespoke type services, and they want a named security analyst. And that's what the enterprise tier is. So this is how we've created this flexible pricing model. And it's not just pricing, it's packaging, it's capabilities, but it's all based on risk. And really, that's what you guys need to understand, where it's not a one size fits all from us, because not everything in your environment has the same risk profile. So, that's what we're trying to do for you here. Now, if you move ahead, what business do I have here? Why am I talking to you about all of this? So if I look at Gartner and Forrester, the two preeminent cybersecurity analyst firms, Forrester, in what's fresh off the presses this quarter, Q3 2020. Oh gosh, we're in Q4 now. But 2020 has been a long year. Yeah. But in just the last couple of months, they've reconfirmed us as a leader in the global MSSPs. Gartner calls us a visionary in their Magic Quadrant. These are, and by the way, we're doing MDR, so they're recognizing what we're doing plays really well even in the MSS space. We've got customers. We had told you earlier, we have over 4,000 customers. If you want to move ahead one. These 4,000 customers, I didn't, the best part is, when we first set out to, what is Alert Logic doing for our clients? And when you hear Brett talk about all of the challenges that you guys are facing, the one constant theme that I extracted from exploring our case studies was this theme of peace of mind. That's why you get Alert Logic. That's why you buy MDR. That's why you invest in detection technologies, because you want the peace of mind. This is really what we do. We've got a handful of customers here from, what is that, Brett, your soil? And a few from my soil as well. But ultimately, the protection that we offer, whether it's with the 24/7 coverage between the US and the UK, between all of the security experts that we've got on staff that are basically extensions of your security team. And in some cases, and in many cases, we are your security team. A lot of times when we send alerts, we're sending it back to the general IT folks because that's the way we're set up. We can send it back to a SOC. We can send it back to a security analyst. We can send it back to an IT generalist. But it's with the remediation guidance on what you all need to be doing. This almost brings me to the end of really what we wanted to carry through. And if you don't mind, John, the last slide we've got here. So, these are things to ask yourself, and go ahead and build it out. How are you handling 24/7? What happens if it's Boxing Day and nobody's in the office? How would you know if you were being hacked? If you were, is there something you could do? Do you know how to respond? And lastly, if you can't really answer these questions, you got to understand you're not alone. Nobody is alone in this. It's a daunting challenge, but there are organizations like Alert Logic, like Corsair, that can definitely help you get to the security and protection that you all desperately need. And gosh, in some cases being mandated by compliance, but you're not alone. That's the goal. There is a silver lining to this cloud. There are organizations like us that can help you. And we're here for you. Brett?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bharath. Always good to to have you share your ideas on screen with the team. I think it just kind of reinforces and hammers home the idea that it is a complex world out there, and there's an immense amount of value to having a competent partner in place that understands that world. So just perhaps in closing from my side, a couple of parting thoughts, I think, in light of what Bharath's covered and the introduction from ourselves as well. there's an immense amount of information floating around, folks, in terms of what's going on currently, what the trends are, what we see coming out of the marketplace. And of course, this is extremely fluid and extremely dynamic. So feel free to ask questions. I mean, that's where every solution starts with a question being asked. Understand where you are as a business, and possibly look for best practice type scenarios to see where you could be as a business. It always makes a lot of sense to assess your environment naturally, and really with a view to make just a basic plan, even if it's a rudimentary plan in terms of what you believe you can do, from an incremental perspective as well. Again, with a lot of our customers, a lot of our new customers that we onboard, we don't expect anybody to be throwing the kitchen sink at the problem up front. Inevitably, it's not the best solution at all. Incremental steps are definitely the right way to approach resolving any potential problems you may have. And then just being very much a realist about things. Take a very pragmatic approach to cybersecurity. There are certain elements that you can include. There are other elements you can exclude. As Bharath showed as well, there are many components that make up the full-blown journey in terms of what would make you ultimately secure. But obviously you can do that in a paced and a methodical process as well. And again, touching on the key elements that Bharath's eloquently covered for us today, look critically at managing your environment. I mean, take a real look at what your capacity is and what your capabilities are. And then potentially visit what a partner company could do for you. Most partners that are capable partners will be able to meet you halfway in terms of your capacities and your capabilities, and it makes for a much better working environment as well. And then I think it goes without saying that obviously you do need to test your environment from time to time. Once you've made certain decisions and you've implemented certain solutions in that space, it's absolutely pivotal that you keep your feet grounded, and ensure that you are in tune with the market by testing and adjusting your world continuously. So with that, I'd like to thank you very, very much for listening to my side as well. It's been an absolute pleasure. And Wendy, if I could hand back to you at this point, yes?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Bharath. Very comprehensive cover of, it's quite scary. It scared me listening to all what could happen. I think we're in a position now that you don't ask, it's not a case of if, I think it's more a case of when. And I think that being prepared for it and taking steps that you and Bharath have both covered today gives us an idea of what we need to be doing to look at this. Now, I'm just looking to see if we have any questions. I haven't got anything much come up. I think it's because it was so comprehensive, if I'm honest. But I have been asked if we can share these slides, presentations with the attendees, if you're happy, Brett and Bharath, for that to happen. So I'll get that from you, and yeah, fine, that's a thumbs up from Brett. So thank you for that. So we're happy to do that. Otherwise, any other questions from anyone? No? Okay, John, if you could just advance for me, thank you. Okay, for those of you who are new to the Chamber and our events, just a little bit of upcoming events for you, some member networking, and some webinars and some local events about HS2. So keep an eye on our website, that all of our events are totally up to date on that. And also this, if I could just say that this webinar has been recorded and will be available in a few days on YouTube, and we can send out the link to that to anyone who's interested, but you can access that. So it just remains for me again to thank you, Brett, thank you, Bharath, and we look forward maybe to hearing from you again, but with good positive news, not because we've got a security breach. Thank you.